If your ex broke up with you out of nowhere and they said that they can't give you what you need right now, or that you need to focus on yourselves separately and maybe someday you can come back together, watch this video because I'm going to give you some background as to why this happened out of the blue and what's going on now and what you can do next. So when you're broken up with in this way, usually it's indicative of somebody that has a dismissive avoidant attachment style. And what that means is that in childhood, your ex experienced some kind of neglect or emotional neglect that basically made them not get wired the same way as everyone else. They're sort of broken to some extent emotionally. All right. And, their norm is not everyone else's norm. It's a different experience of reality. And a lot of times this comes with a feeling of defectiveness because, they kind of zero in, that things don't tend to go so well for them, even though they get feelings, they attach with people, but they've got a string of failed relationships because they've got an inability to communicate, an inability to not inability to empathize, but it's like hard. It drains them. Okay. And because they don't communicate in relationships, typically problems mound up because they don't communicate their needs, they don't communicate their boundaries, and these things get unmet and violated, and it all builds up to where all of a sudden some big stressful work event happens or some big life event happens, like something in their family, something big happens, and it just totally derails them because they're people pleasers and they just go with the flow because they don't want to have conflict. So they just go along with everything, and now all of a sudden their needs are not getting met, and now they get derailed by some big life event, and they're just going to cut and run from their relationship. Most of the time, the people that get into relationships with dismissive avoidance, aka possibly you, you're going to have a more anxious attachment style. In other words, someone in your childhood abandoned you, and now you're trying to get this love need met by this person that kind of is hard to get. Like if you can get their validation because they're oftentimes distracted by other things, then it's going to hit home more because they're kind of harder to get to begin with. And if you're not an anxious attachment style, you might be a fearful avoidant. In other words, you had experienced some kind of chaos or trauma or abuse in your childhood, and you have a big trust wound. And typically, if you lean a little bit more anxious as a fearful avoidant, which has both ends of the spectrums, you can avoid and you can also be anxious. But if you're dating a dismissive avoidant, you're going to be more anxious end of the spectrum. Okay. And that's the story behind you. Most likely you're a fearful avoidant or an anxious attachment style. Now, what's happening is your trauma from childhood is like clashing, right? If you experience abandonment, you're going to go to your dismissive avoidant partner, seek reassurance all the time. Because they're distant, you're going to seek even more reassurance. And for them, they're just coping with this inability to show up in the relationship, inability to communicate and